Welcome to the Operate Podcast, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at company building from the perspective of the builders themselves. This is how we operate.
Welcome to the Operate Podcast. I'm Kerry Ransom. Today's episode is sponsored by Hunt Club, which is a new category of search firm that leverages the power of relationships and referrals to find you the best talent for your company. They use technology to transform thousands of subject matter experts into the world's most powerful talent network. They've got over 10,000 trusted industry leaders that refer top talent that they know nationwide to exciting positions like yours. Reach out to me if you want more info, or you can go to huntclub.com and tell them that Kerry sent you. I'm super excited to have my friend Joshua Lee with me on the show today. Before we get to hear from him, though, let me tell you a little bit about Joshua. He is currently the founder and CEO of Ardius, which is a super fast-growing SaaS startup that helps companies identify and recover tax credits. I've had the pleasure over the last year of getting to know him, and we have plenty of things to talk about every time we get together, whether it's about startups, life as an investor, or even his former big company background at E&Y. They have done some remarkable things in a very short period of time at Ardius, helping companies recover millions of dollars in tax credits from things like research and development. And they've done it by building their product and their company and really helping people recover this to feel like non-dilutive capital, which is awesome. When you're a founder and you hear the words non-dilutive capital, your ears almost immediately perk up. Yeah. And so, you know, he has been in and around this world for a while, so we'll talk about that. But he finally decided he needed to actually build a company purpose-built to do this. So we'll talk about how Ardius came to be. The other thing, you know, I love about Joshua is he's super oriented to SoCal. He's got degrees from both of the big LA schools, an undergrad at UCLA and a master's at USC. And he's building the company primarily here in SoCal as well. So we'll talk about that too. Joshua, great to have you here on the
Thanks for having me, Kerry.
Absolutely.
I'm already on Hunt Club, by the way. I love that intro. I'm already there looking things up on Hunt Club. That's great.
I love it. So I gave a quick intro to Ardius, but I always like to, you know, let you as the founder describe it. I think the best way is, you know, tell me about a client that is using your software and what the impact it's having on their business.
Yeah. The first company that comes to mind is a typical startup, right? They're probably in their second, even third year, right? Have never even thought about taxes. Let's be honest. Yep. It's probably the last thing on most people's minds. They're busy running the business. They're fundraising. They're making their, you know, first viable product, right? Mm-hmm. Going out to market, and then, you know, we come along, right? And they, you know, plug into our software, and we basically take data that's already in existence, all the expenses, all the payroll, their tax returns. There's basically a digital footprint that we call it, right? Whether it be in your general ledger, right? I'm using all these accounting terms, so hopefully I'm not scaring everyone. But they look at this, and then we pull that and extract that information, and then we can tell them what they basically qualify for. So basically, we start with the R&D tax credit. It's probably the biggest and most non-dilutive credit there is. So dollar for dollar, you know, it can offset your tax liability. And in most cases, right, for startups, there's no tax liability, right? Mm-hmm. They're either pre-revenue, they're in perpetual maybe operating losses. Sure. And that's okay. For us, we can take these credits and then monetize them into payroll, right? Payroll tax offsets, mm-hmm. which could be huge, right? So even though there's no liability, you may have, you know, 5 or 6 full-time, you know, mm-hmm. employees, and that could actually get offset with some of our credits. That could actually extend, you know, runway, right? Number one, and number two, might even go back into your operating, you know, budget. So, and that's what's crazy. It's basically taking a look back, right? As easy as we create a framework for the current year, we can then obviously create an infrastructure going forward, and just as easily take a look at going, backward in time. And so we're not asking the companies to do anything different. It's just let us, scour through the financial, data, and let us come out with, what we think might potentially qualify for these credits. So
Amazing. So, a couple things. One, give my audience a sense of the scale of
Mhm.
how much of this is available and actually utilized today.
Yeah, so as of 2018, so that's, I guess the data is catching up, as most government censuses are, but it was roughly 12.5 billion, right? That was claimed,
Mhm.
right, in R&D credits. And again, this is just an estimate, but offline and online, you could tell just even talking with the IRS that only about 20% of
Mm.
all companies are actually claiming the R&D credit that are eligible.
Yes.
So take that and extrapolate, that 12.5 billion, and you're talking, no less than 50 billion,
Mm.
right? That is eligible or that's out there. And that's part of the challenge, right? Is just education, right? You don't
Yes.
know what you don't know.
That's right.
And most companies, I can tell you, and they say, Josh, great to meet you. We love Ardius, but we don't qualify. And that's literally the first reaction is we don't
Mhm.
qualify for R&D, right? Because the tax definition of R&D is so broad, much
Mm.
broader than what we typically think, with like a white laboratory coat,
Sure.
trying to discover Newton's 15th law.
Mm.
But really it's a lot broader, and the IRS and the federal government have a very different definition, right? And most companies don't even know they qualify, which is again, part of our job, and
Sure.
maybe very helpful that we're on, your awesome, podcast here. So
Well, I mean, I think you know this. I mean, I had personal experience with this many years ago when I was selling a company, only to realize we had a huge net operating loss, and I thought, oh, we're not going to have any tax, and we saw a big tax bill, and in exploring how to offset that, I was able to go back many years and recover credits to offset that tax liability. And so I was a believer. But I think your point's a great one, which is, I mean, there's so many technicalities, and if you're an early stage startup, for the most part, you probably can't justify having a full-time accounting and finance staff anyway.
mhm.
And so then if you have a part-time, or you get your first person, the chance that they're an expert in all of these intricacies and nuances is incredibly low, right? And so we've seen a significant increase in the number of tools and intelligent solutions like yours to try to help here. And it's kind of been a little bit of a renaissance, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been touted as like the honey for taxes, right? It's
Mm.
basically
Hmm.
you got your shopping cart, you're about to check out,
Hmm.
and you're always wondering, I wonder if there's a coupon code, that
That's
could,
right.
you know, nice little plug for honey there. And
Yeah.
but for us, it's the same thing. Like you're doing your normal course of business. You have your tax return. You're wondering, I wonder if there's anything else, right, that we're not picking up, that we're not
Hmm.
maximizing or optimizing,
Yeah.
right? So R&D credit's great. It's again a great digital footprint into the company, but I mean there's so many other things.
That's right.
It's like one of hundreds of credits that we're looking at, right? That we can actually pinpoint and figure out based on data whether or not you could qualify or not. So
Yeah. And it makes all the sense in the world, because when you're in those formative years, and I would say, in even as you get into more stability as a company, every dollar matters. And these things, just having someone with the intelligence like Ardius is a critical partner from my perspective.
and then when you were at your last company here, did you remember what the experience was like in claiming the credit back in the
Well, it
day?
was all, yeah, in that case it was all people,
Yeah.
right? And we paid one of the major accounting firms to come in and do a study, and it cost a fair bit. And I would say what we ended up doing was making sure that that was almost baked into the amount of credit. So we probably went back an extra year so we could afford to pay them the service, right?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly, back at Ernst and Young, I mean, the studies back then were so labor intensive, right? It was a manual process. We had, teams upon teams that traditionally would go out, on site. We call it a war room, right? We'd camp out on site at the client's place, and like a lot of things were just so labor intensive. And so you could, I remember just several years right before founding Ardius, right? Even in my own portfolio companies, we had a company that had 9 employees. Right? Our credit was about 100, $75,000, $180,000, and we got a quote from the mid tier and big four companies, and it almost cost. I think the proposal was about 125K. Right? It was actually more than half the credit
Almost
that
the
we
credit,
ended
yeah.
up getting, and it's because it's still very labor intensive. There's a lot of documentation, substantiation, qualitative information that needs to be obtained. But what we try to do with Ardius is we've actually built in a lot of automation. Right, we're using some machine learning. We're using a lot of the APIs that we've actually helped build out for most of these payroll companies. With your QuickBooks, your Xero, FreshBooks, Sage, all these different applications we can now tap into, and even software companies. I mean, you and I, invest a lot in SaaS-based like companies, right? Like we're looking into GitHub now, right? Jira, right? We can go into different systems now and extrapolate some project tracking information to help quantitatively do these things that we ordinarily needed like a big team to do before, right? And so that's where it's really helpful to work with startups, make it cost effective, right, for them to claim the credit, which is again the whole intent of the credit to begin with was to keep innovation here in the U.S., right, and
that's right,
and make it eligible for companies to stay here to do good work. So
yeah, makes a ton of sense. So the market is really heated up around this. You have a couple competitors who have raised considerable recent rounds of funding. What do you think is causing that?
Which is awesome. I mean, the industry is awesome,
yes.
right? No, I think there's a couple of things, right? I think the pandemic, number one, has kind of accentuated non-dilutive capital,
like
right?
the PPP loan.
PPP was a good example. EIDL, these loans that the government was giving out to help companies, and the people got, for example, the PPP, right? They also tied it to payroll tax, right? How to defer that, right? And the R&D credit could actually help eliminate those taxes. So if you wanted the PPP forgiven, right, and most companies did, you would have to stop the deferment of your payroll taxes, right? So you couldn't give with the right, take with the left, right? And people were looking for different ways to then go, well, how can we have our cake and eat it too? Because most companies were really struggling. And so a lot of people found things like the R&D credit and like, wow, this actually exists, it's been around, how did I not know about it? And so I think having actually the government do a lot of the advertising for us started that whole snowball effect, right, where it's like, wow, we should really start taking a look at tax credits, right, and anything that non-dilutive. So that's number one. And I think two, it's people are just like, hey, taxes are ripe for disruption, right? It's such an archaic space, right? It's I've always touted and joked, right? It's like an accounting firm run by accountants. And so we're like probably the last group, I'll include myself, right, as an accountant, right, that thinks of us as innovative, right? So we're trying to look at different applications, how we can do things differently, right? And so this makes all the sense in the world if we really take a step back, right? We talk about the Internal Revenue Code. It's all a bunch of rules, algorithms, right? Just depending on who's in office, these rules change. So rather than having to go in and manually, right, adjust and change, every single client, which is typically what we do, software makes all the sense in the world where kind of top down, we can change it at the top level, right, and disseminate that information. We call it democratizing taxes, right? Then we can get that information out to custom companies, right, to make sure they're aware of it, they don't miss any deadlines. At the very least, they should look into it is what we
Sure.
like to say. So
Sure.
yeah.
You raised a really interesting point. I was in the legal industry several years ago, and I found it really remarkable how resistant people were who bill their time to things that will make them more efficient so that they bill less time. And I think accounting firms are somewhat in that same vein, where you go, well, why would I want to, like, on the surface, it's easy for people to say, why would I want to cannibalize if I can charge all this money to do people's taxes? Why would I want to, in theory, cannibalize my revenue? But it could fundamentally change the business model for the ones who really embrace it. And so some of these things, I think, as you would agree, are inevitable. Software,
Yeah.
process,
I think a
just like
great
everything
point.
else.
Great point and great example is, we saw, cap shares, e-shares,
Mhm.
and became Carta,
Mhm.
right? I mean, originally they came into the market wanting to just automate and give, empower people to do their
Sure.
cap table management. And at the time, I think the legal profession or, law firms were like, wow, this could really reduce our cannibalize to your,
Mhm.
to your point, our hours. But eventually there was just, adoption, right? They're like, hey, this software actually is great. So rather than compete with, these law firms started using them,
That's right.
right? And so what we found is also, in working with CPAs, right? Working with CFOs, controllers,
Mhm.
like it wasn't, we weren't like saying, hey, we want to come in there and take over that function. Really, we're just being very complimentary, right? We want to be collaborative about, hey, this could be very labor intensive. We have a solution that, you know, expedites and makes it more efficient, right?
Mhm.
And can automate a lot of these things. And so now we've seen even um, firms come to us, right, and asking if they can partner with us,
Mhm.
right? Because inevitably, I think we learned a lot, like the first 3 to 6 months, right, of Ardius, which was, Ardius was always up here, right, the hero. Like, hey, Ardius found us, 150 grand, right,
Mhm.
$200,000, and it was great. And inevitably, it was like, hey, how did we miss this, right?
Mhm.
Like, did we, do we need to get a new CPA? Did we? No, it
Sure.
was more like, hey, this is a very technical area,
Yes.
right? And it gets missed all the time, and it's nothing on, CPAs at all, right? It's just there's a lot of things going on,
Sure.
right? And we get so busy, and so we've actually had firms come to us, with one client, and they're like, wow, we have 40 more, right? That actually could use the same thing, and so we do this collaboratively. We work with them all the time now, getting it filed,
Sure.
claimed, substantiated, and it's actually been more empowering to CPAs,
Sure.
right, and other firms than actually cannibalizing it. So
Yeah, I think you're expanding their service set, their scope
exactly,
of knowledge. It's like a doctor. You're not going to get rid of your general practitioner or internal medicine physician because they miss some really nuanced edge health case. You can't expect them to know that all. Same with a CPA, right? So yeah, I think a completely fair uh, analogy.
yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Yeah, a generalist and a specialist. So
That's right.
we partner together, right, just to,
Hmm.
to make sure we optimize everything for the clients. So
Yeah.
I think it's great.
So you were doing a lot of investing and kind of, I would call it venture building before Ardius, but you were doing kind of what I'm doing now, where you're involved in multiple things. What got you to say I have to go all in on Ardius?
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey, right? And so just to
Hmm.
clarify, venture building, right? It's a little different than venture capital,
Yes.
right? Which is like, hey, venture capital, we're just investing and
Hmm.
kind of more support and corporate governance, right? Venture building is very different, right? We roll up our sleeves,
Hmm.
we get our hands dirty, and we're building teams. We're operational. We're everything and everything, right?
That's right.
To companies, and to a certain extent, we've even come alongside, right? And we're
Hmm.
actually part of the teams that we invest in. So outside of the capital, we're building. So hence venture building. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was great. I love what you're doing, Carrie. I think what you're doing here, and especially in SoCal, it's fantastic, right? Love venture building, and so yeah, it was great. We had two funds, right, in the last it was like 6.5, 7 years, and
Hmm.
loved it. It was great. We had a portfolio of about 23 companies that we
Amazing.
made investments in, and it was awesome. And it actually organically just happened, right? It was literally uh, these companies coming, to us, and when they find out you're formerly a CPA, right? They're like, hey, free advice, right? And so
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
naturally we're looking at their tax returns, we're looking at financial planning, and again, all these things were just inevitably like, you know, to a T, right? Where's the R&D credit? Did you
Hmm.
think about cost segregation? Did you do a 409A? Like, did you do
Yep.
evaluation? Okay, what about your 83B election? Save
Yep.
yourself, some money here. And so literally we took all these companies, right, to uh, you know, the EYs of the world, the mid tiers, and we're like, hey, here's 23 companies we could really use the help. And just inevitably it was they couldn't service us. They
Hmm.
just couldn't do it. We were just too small, right? Like we're okay with the hit ratio, right, of 1 to 10.
Sure.
1 out of 10, make it, right? But not a service firm, right? It's like, hey, we can't even service you guys because you guys are too small. And so we ended up looking at what we could do for our companies, and we actually had some in-house developers, right, at our venture building
Hmm.
company. And they said, Josh, why don't we try to automate this, right? And so
Yep.
it's like, automate taxes, what a concept, right? And so I have a background at EY. I was like always thinking about how we could use new technologies, and part of in thinking through that throughout the years. And so we actually ended up doing just a prototype, right? This is like
Hmm.
summer of 2018, and it was rough and dirty, right? Just as any prototype would be, but it was serviceable, right? It worked.
Sure.
I mean, I had to take it across the finish line. I remember that summer, right? But it worked, and so that was really interesting that we could uh, do that in a very short amount of time. Number one, and number two, we then started getting calls from accounting firms that again, based on my network, where it's
Hmm.
like, hey Josh, are you back in the accounting game? And I was like, no, I'm just doing this as more of a love project, honestly,
Hmm.
right? And that really was true. And we ended up uh, at a very high level licensing our software very early on, right, to these companies. And so that kind of perpetuated the snowball, right? And then I remember these two developers maybe having an intervention with me. It's like, hey Josh, we'd really like for you to you know not just plug this into an accounting firm, but what about going door to door to actual startups,
Hmm.
and so I was actually raising a third fund at the time, and I was recalling, we don't have time to go door to door, right? But literally what I ended up doing was taking it to companies like yourself, right? Like Operate,
Hmm.
or at the time it was Mucker,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, and other venture building or more accelerator type models, and they have portfolio companies too.
Hmm.
And so we ended up servicing some of those funds as well, and it was the encouragement of those accelerators. And they're like, hey Josh, you should really consider going full time. Like, none of our companies have this service. We've never heard of this thing. We think this would be something that you should go full time in. So
Hmm.
that's where it was like a heart to heart moment. Like, you don't do anything half hearted, right? And as you know, it's really difficult to do anything like entrepreneurial just half time.
Hmm.
So it was like running a fund and starting up a company. So that's when you made a decision, like, we're going to go full time on this, and really go and give it a go. So haven't
Well,
looked since.
yeah, it's a great story, and I think the couple of things I take away are that, I mean, the market's pulling it. It's hard to, at some point, it's hard to resist when you just keep hearing that market pull. And I think as well, kind of the founder pull of, hey, I'm a good fit with this market at the right time, which it's hard to de-risk these startups, as you were saying. At times we're forced to accept a hit rate that seems abysmally low, but when you're getting those kinds of pull signals, you probably can't ignore it. So I think you're smart enough to know that yeah, I probably need to go do this. And yeah, it's obviously working.
The only one that thought I was crazy was my wife, but other than her, everyone was super. She's like, "Gonna go back and be a founder? Let's do this, right?" So no, she's super awesome. She knows tax was my original passion, which again, it's almost people hear that they cringe like tax, but no, I love it. I mean, I love finding again challenges and solutions, right, to the things that again people just don't either appreciate or don't want to think about, right? Which is like again going back to taxes. And so yeah, there's a good product market fit, and still is, right, to the market. And then I think there's also that deep appreciation for the startup ecosystem, right? Just because again naturally fitting with a lot of venture funds, their portfolios, having a deep network, right, in that space, like people like yourself, right, that we're good friends, that we that have portfolio companies. And I think just wanting startups to succeed, right, whether it be like through investing, finding them non-dilutive capital, or even now it's funny because I'm used to you can empathize, we would see pitch decks like every week, every day. We'd go through like tens, 20s, 30s, hundreds, right, per month. And even now as Ardius, we're seeing just as many of those pitches because we get so many customers coming through our door. And that's awesome because it's created a relevancy for my investor hat as well, to maybe even source deal flow to other venture funds, or finding deal flow for good fits for them as they fundraise, or maybe they're hitting that inflection point where they don't even know it because we're looking at their books and saying, hey, you guys should maybe consider raising, right? I think there's some good growth capital here that you could probably utilize to put gasoline to the fire here. And so some of these founders are just again so new that they're like not even thinking about fundraising. And so truly being an advisor, and again, anytime you find someone free money, they become your best friend. And so they are like, Josh, hey, you say jump, we say how high, like, tell me who we should talk to, what we should do. And so that has been also a really fun thing to watch, like that evolve as we just, it starts with the R&D, but and the credits, but it leads to so much more, right? Finding sometimes a really good bookkeeper, finding good legal counsel, finding a really good fit investor, right, for these companies. So we like to see ourselves, expanding these verticals, as well.
Totally makes sense. There's the data and the interconnectedness is incredibly valuable when you can help piece that together. And I think the other takeaway, I talk a lot about this idea of trying to keep founders as best you can in their area of genius, particularly in those early stages, which usually their genius area is why they started the company in the first place. And having to go figure out something like R&D tax credits, as an example, is something that could be greatly opportunistic, but is going to be dilutive from them and their area of genius, which is probably how they're going to win, right? And so we do a lot of things in really trying to get them clear about that, and then talk about the necessary, not strategic things, which I would say R&D tax credits are even outside of that, but just making sure you have accounting or HR things in place.
That's right.
But you don't need to go figure those out. You're not going to get a gold star for doing it perfectly in the beginning. You need to get a great product that the market loves. And so that's always an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned, like, even thinking back, throughout the years, right, in my own career, we were always touted and told, hey, be well-rounded, right? Be everything to all trades. And then in the latter half of my corporate life, right, we were told, no, focus on your strengths, know your strength and do it well, right, and own it, right? And so yeah, I think the same is true of founders, right? Like follow your passion, like do what you love what you do, right? And chances of success are so much higher, right? And so if they're out there, right, not having to worry about their taxes, right, or these HR things, right?
Yeah, or business development. You may be good at building but not selling. That's okay. Right. It's recognizing that, and I think you need some of these general. It's the puzzle making.
That's right.
That is is the challenge, but also the for at least for me, the fun.
Yeah, and I think that's a reminder to all the entrepreneurs out there, right? It's like, hey, you started this for a reason. Like, focus on that, and it's like your compass, right? If you
Right.
get lost, like, just you started this for one particular reason, and don't get distracted by all the crazies, we call it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Around you. So
That's right. And it's, at the end of the day, to do it great, it's a team sport.
yeah, that's right. I mean, that's I can't say that enough, right? I mean, just coming alongside and finding the right people
Mhm.
and a team. Like they say, like, no entrepreneur is an island, right? That kind of
right.
mentality, right? You definitely need the support of smarter people in the room, I guess. So
That's right.
it's great.
Well, let's talk about the SoCal startup ecosystem. You referenced some of the folks that are part of it, that you've been deep in. You're from here. You spent a lot of time here. You've also spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. As you think about the difference between the two, how would you describe that?
Yeah, Silicon Beach. Shout out to Silicon Beach.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's definitely. I can see a lot of differences in the way even investors are
Mhm.
taking a look at companies, right? We were certain valuations,
Mhm.
expectations, right, for companies, and I still think LA is a very unique spot,
Mhm.
right? In our first and second fund, we focused a lot on entertainment, right?
Mhm.
We're still the entertainment capital
Mhm.
in the world, right? With Hollywood, we looked at things like IP,
Mhm.
right? Like a lot of stuff with the major studios in our backyard, right? Content creation, content. So I mean, there's a lot of sticking points, right, to LA, and I think the numbers can't ignore it, right? There's
Mhm.
like a lot of winners that are coming out from here, and even in the space, like we're talking about, um, taxes and audits and accounting. Like even from my own high school, right? I have people that came out from the same high school, from the same firm, right? And starting up SaaS-based, startups, right? It's
Mhm.
like, so I think the startup culture is taking a foot as well, right? It kind of all changed with the pandemic again, because now we're all work from home, but
Mhm.
just the work-life culture in LA is something to really behold and witness, right? Just in terms of how easy access we have to to the beaches and to the
Mhm.
weather and to everything else. But that definitely, you can see a difference in how even venture funds are looking at LA right now, right? And
Mhm.
Silicon Beach here. So, but yeah, I think that's taken a hold, and it's continued to thrive, actually, right? I don't think it's ever been hotter, right?
Mhm.
In down south. So we've had a lot of good exits as well, and even acquihires or acquisitions, right, in the last several years. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on the rise, and I think you highlight some of the key strengths that we have as a region that are relevant to where the world is going, right? The storytelling, the creator. There's a lot of discussion about kind of passion creator economy that's been unlocked certainly over the last year, even more so than before.
Yeah, I
And
think
yeah.
it's what I call convergence, right?
Mhm.
So a good example, we had a couple startups, working with CAA, right,
Mhm.
and working with sports influencers, celebrities, right, major influencers who now with all these different platforms, right, can really help drive user acquisition, advertising, marketing,
Mhm.
right, and even like I said, a lot of sports athletes we work with, right, know that their brand and shelf life, right, for their brand has a certain window, and they're all about utilizing their brand, and they're
Mhm.
such a good fit from who is accessible here, and
Mhm.
just in our backyard of who we could get, right, for a certain product, right, and they're getting more savvy now too, right? It's like, oh, want to invest or have equity and lend to their talents, right, on that stuff. So even on the operational side, it's fascinating to see even that group get involved,
Mm-hmm.
right, with startups. It's now cool. Maybe it's, I don't know, Shark Tank and like
Sure.
Silicon Valley, the show. It's become mainstream, right? That startups are a cool thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that even the talent pool, right, before the pandemic, which was like you mentioned USC, UCLA, in our backyard right here, right? The talent pool is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think we're finally seeing that they believe they can start it here, build it here, grow it
yeah,
here, as opposed to feel like they have to be pulled to Northern California or New York or someone else. That's encouraging, obviously, as
well,
well.
that's on you. That's totally on you because it's companies like operate what you do, right? That say, hey, we're going to be here in SoCal, we're right here, right, and we're going to support the startup ecosystem, right? And just even my experiences with you guys have been amazing. It's just been the help, the advice, right? And again, having done it before and as an investor too, like there's certain things that it's the minutia of the trees in the forest, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the reminders, like I like should know this stuff, but having someone like yourself who's more objective, that has done it, can walk the walk, talk the talk. It's like, oh yeah, all every step of the way, right? And I think that's where that wasn't here before, right? There was very far and few between, and if you didn't get that traction, you're just easily maybe more prone to either to look elsewhere, right?
Sure.
Or maybe have to relocate, go
That's
up
right.
north. I think even Portland or Texas, right? You would have to go somewhere else to try to get a foothold. But I think it's definitely helpful to have someone like yourself that
Well,
believes in
thank you. Yeah, we're just one node, but I think your point is a good one, which is I think you've got a lot more of that network and support system in place, and hopefully more as we see more success and experience occur here. So as you think about, you're mentioning kind of, hey, you've done a lot, you have a lot of experience, but we all have gaps in our skills. If you think about the key things that you felt like gave you the confidence, obviously you have the domain experience around
Mhm.
tax. You've been doing venture building. What were the key gaps that you knew that you had when you were starting, that you felt like, hey, I need to address and fill these right away?
Yeah, I think it is, and maybe it's more just pervasive in personality. But as again, going back to being an accountant
Mm-hmm.
for 13 and a half years, right, uh, at EY, and just being, maybe it's an innate personality, but uh, just looking at and identifying risks, that was like
Mm-hmm.
my job, right? And so identifying risk and not seeing the reward, right? For sometimes, like in being an entrepreneur, making that jump,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's pervasive among everyone. It's just in general, like just the fear of failure, right, is something that I had to overcome as a gap, right? Because I had
Mm-hmm.
domain expertise, and even from the beginning, right, like even helped the folks who even drafted the regs on the
Mm-hmm.
R&D credit. Like I know this space inside and out. I can breathe this, right? But still being able to make that jump in as an entrepreneur, right, and saying, okay, I'm gonna, not fear failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's tough,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, that goes back to the support system,
Mm-hmm.
right, of having investors that believe or come alongside to encourage, or have done it, right, and said, no, this we know can work. We want to try things that are in your favor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here are the mistakes that we made along the way, so we can avoid these potholes, right? So that's a huge gap, right? Like just trying to overcome, like, okay, I'm gonna just identify 10 risk items and not see the way to succeed and see the upside. That for me is something that I look for in entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, do you fear failure? And I think it'd be a good thing too, right? I mean, it propels you to
Yeah.
succeed,
Yeah.
but it's also not being afraid to fail, or not afraid to take on challenges,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? Because
it's finding that right balance, right?
yeah.
Where again, if you're willing to have that objective partner, and it could be your business partner, it could be
Mhm.
your investor, it could be a mentor, it could come in a lot of forms, but I think having that, I think it's a great point, that having someone, we talk a lot about how we really view sometimes ourselves as just being that mirror to hold it up to the founder and say, hey, you know, are we looking at this from every angle? Are we being self-aware enough
Yeah.
of what the opportunity is or the risks, or because if you, I mean, you had every reason, you have the domain expertise to go do this probably better than anybody else can, and so that's the opportunity, but your training probably was a bit of a counterbalance.
Yeah, and maybe it was the space that we're in, we're always trained, as an auditor or as an
Hmm.
accountant, right? You're just looking at risk all the time. But I think there's good reasons for that, right? And that could be a good thing, but also to kind of break out and not fear, you know, failing. But they say it's cliche, but failing forward,
Sure.
failing fast, even failing cheaply, right? Just
Hmm.
hey, it's an iterative process, and most startups, as you know, like it'll never end up the way you started,
That's right.
right? So it's probably easier just to do quicker iterations of that,
Hmm.
right? Like Eric Ries, right? And
Yeah,
in the lean startup methodology, right? Those are things that I think have a lot of merit, right?
for
And
sure. Well, I mean, he'll even say it's really not about months of runway. It's
Mhm.
the number of potential pivots that, like, you know, how much capital do you have? How many
Oh, so
pivots
that's
will
such a
that
good point.
allow you?
Yep,
Because it's more important that than it is actual time.
that's right. Yeah, how much you can. So that's where things are very like organic, right?
Hmm.
No 2 weeks are the same in a startup is what I like to prepare founders for, right? It's like yeah, and that's where having that team, right, is so crucial because
Hmm.
I mean, there's going to be some weeks where you just bouncing off the walls, right? Ideas, right, and then honing in that focus, right,
Hmm.
to actually try, that next iteration, right, and making sure that it's the best chance that with the best information you have, right, to do something, right.
Hmm.
So yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're coming up on time, Josh. What do you feel like? I mean, you're still early in this artist journey, but what do you feel like you've learned about yourself that has kind of surprised you in this one versus other things that
Wow,
you've done?
that's a great question. I'm surprised how much I still enjoy it, right. I
Mm.
mean, the founding side is very different than the investing side.
Mhm.
So, I would have thought, man, there's been some obviously longer nights, right? And just burning the midnight oil again, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure you do too. I'm not saying that
Sure.
that you don't, but it's a little different of a feeling when, like, those beginning stages where uh, you got to make it work,
Mhm.
right? Or you got to figure out what that next partnership, that next channel, that next customer is, and you're just like hungry for it. And
Mhm.
so it almost felt like it wasn't work because I enjoyed it so much, right? It's like they
Mhm.
say, if you love what you do, you'll never have to work a day in your life. That kind
Yeah.
of mentality. And so, but
And that's
it
your
is different.
strategic advantage, really. I
It
mean,
is.
if
It,
everybody else looks at it as work and you look at it as play, I mean, it's
it's so
almost your
dangerous.
advantage.
It's so
Yeah.
dangerous because again, what is very different is life stage,
Mhm.
right? So as I, you know, did this in my early 20s, right? Uh, single individual.
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys see my kids' artwork up here. I mean,
Mhm.
it's like
Mhm.
working from home here, but it's literally I have a family now. 4 kids. They're
Mhm.
ultimately my 4 startups, right? Like
Mhm.
literally.
Amazing.
And it's funny is I have to catch myself, right? And it's a very different um, enjoyment because like my oldest is now 11, and he'll ask me what I'm doing,
Mhm.
right? And so it's very different this time around where I can show him, hey, daddy's talking to this company, right? Because we want to do a partnership, we want to work together, or this is a customer of Ardius. And so seeing the light bulb go off for him, right, and he's taking some coding classes, by the way. So he's taking like
Very
Python,
cool.
and so yeah, it's being able to integrate some family life into
Mhm.
this time around is also very special,
Yeah.
versus other times where it was more just like me and I could just do it till the cows come home kind
Mhm.
of thing, right? So
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, that was a big reason why why we did operate is I felt like this is probably the best chance for me to be my best combination of builder and investor. And I think I'll be better at home because of it, right? I mean, just like when you're activated like you are right now, I think you're better in every area of life.
Yeah. Again, you just again are in that sweet spot, right? We call it
Mhm.
just, hey, you feel like you're in that convergence of all these prior experiences
Yeah.
coming together, right? As investor,
Mhm.
operator, builder, and it's all coming together. Like, again, for me, great to found something that I think can help startups,
Mhm.
which again, that's where I want to be.
Yes.
And then secondly, still having an investor hat on where I could help companies navigate through, fundraising, right, or
Mhm.
finding the right partner,
Mhm.
or right investor, right, to do what they do. And then alongside just seeing them grow, like I think again, seeing obviously the as they grow, so does their R&D credits. So they're
Mhm.
it's self-serving in that sense, but it is a cycle, right? It's like, wow, so different from the last year, right? That we worked with. A
Mhm.
company of 3 is now a company of 30,
Mhm.
right? And it's just like it's that ultimate joy of it's that pride, right? Seeing your customers grow into that. So yeah,
Super
so love
cool.
it. Yeah,
Well, Josh, thank you for coming on the pod with me, and
love it. Yeah,
you
thanks
know,
for having me.
thanks for sharing. I always appreciate how just present and open you are, and giving you are, and it's been so awesome to see how quickly Ardius is growing. You are the 3 to 30 kind of story yourself right now, and I feel so grateful to be along on the ride with you guys.
Yeah, likewise. So we could have done it without you guys. So appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Operate Podcast. If you like this conversation, as a favor to me, you can rate us, review us, or subscribe, or tell your friends. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Operate Podcast. Until next week, get out there and operate.